Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest monologue. And today I'm back to my home ground, if you will, which is conservation. Um, the latest goings on in the world of conservation. NRT is on its deathbed. And as you can see from my expression, I'm devastated. Um, but I'd like to explain this in the context, in a much wider context of what's going on. What has happened is that the so-called community conservation model, this mongrel called the conservancies that I've spoken about for a long time, the model is reaching its sell by date. It has come to its demise and has struggled to define and redefine itself over the years, and it's finally gotten to the season or the time when it dies. What's the conservancy model? I won't go into the details, but conservancy model is one of the most important tools of modern colonialism. And modern colonialism, as I've said elsewhere, is not like the imperial colonialism. The colonists are not necessarily countries. They are Western, yeah, all Western, um, but they're Western capitalist corporations and oligarchs supported by their governments, because the reason why governments hide behind these oligarchs and corporations is that governments are signatory to things like UN treaties, international diplomatic arrangements like the Geneva Convention, etc., that does not allow them to expressly take over parts of other countries or parts thereof. So they let the corporations do that. And the corporations, since they have money, they employ home guards to help them annex territory, remove people, etc. So, who are these home guards? These home guards are conservation organizations, NGOs, so called umbrella bodies. In cases like Kenya, even the state authority like KWS acts as a home guard because they are intellectually unable to have any position of their own. So, back to Kenya, back to what's going on in northern Kenya. Um, 9th, 9th of May 2025, NRT put out a press release that they're changing their top management. Some of us knew they were already in trouble from the time Trump got elected and shut down USAID funding. But 9th of May, they put out a press statement talking about changes, strategic changes in top leadership. They removed Tom Lalampa from CEO position and is replaced by some guy called Vishal Shah, who is experienced in the area of product marketing. He was a brand manager for Campbell's. Is a food company in the US. He created some brand of breakfast cereals and has been he's someone from the corporate world. This is usually the first time when a conservation organization gets in someone from corporate world whose experience is in PwC and other managerial corporate management positions. What we are bringing in is an undertaker to handle the demise and interment of an organization. Tom Lalampa is now something called partnerships officer or something like that. You can know there's a problem because when NRT needed to maintain credibility, they needed a local at the helm. They don't no longer need a local at the helm because they have no long-term credibility left to maintain. Another one they brought in was one Moses Wahisi, who is a sports journalist. I know him from TV, in charge of communications. Now, this is probably, to me, this is the strongest sign. The corporate communications, etc., of NRT and the Nature Conservancy was the point of power. And this one could never be a local. The communications and the PR face of NRT was controlled even from outside Kenya. So once they put in a local Kenyan, and I hope he also knows that this is a temporary arrangement, and it soon be back to sports journalism. Well, 1 week later, 16th of May, and this is an internal communication. NRT is in putting in place all sorts of cost-cutting measures, including redundancies, merging of certain posts, unpaid leave, even for those who are being retained, salary cuts ranging from 10% to 50% salary cuts. So this is something on its deathbed. But what does this mean for the rest of us? As I said, first of all, colonialism originally the tools of colonialism was violence, guns, etc. That's imperial colonialism. Guns, missionaries, the church, education systems, corporate systems, etc. Fast forward, um, fast forward a few decades after independence, then conservation became the tool, and conservation was very useful because it's seen as altruistic, it's seen as inherently good, and they don't have to colonize within borders of demarcated borders of countries. You have things like so-called transboundary conservation areas. Africa Wildlife Foundation used to call them heartlands. Um, in Southern Africa, they call them peace parks, etc. But they're huge areas that cross across international boundaries, but are controlled by the corporate bodies that fund the operations that go there. Um, this is why they need what they call community game scouts or rangers who are armed, who can who can oppress people, can even kill people, but are not under any state structure like Kenya Wildlife Service or Kenya Police or Uganda Police or whatever it is. So that's why they need these things. But our government people, particularly in Kenya, are so narrow-minded they cannot see the larger picture, and especially KWS, they simply can't see anything. That's why they're such active participants in their own demise. K, K, Northern Rangelands Trust became a colossus at the height of their funding. They were running grant portfolios of tens of millions of dollars. um, the amount of money they had actually commanded them a seat on the KWS board of trustees, and for years and years they had a seat there, and would demand whatever they wanted. I remember it must have been 2014 or 15 when I was a member of KWS Carnival Management Committee. Um, the then CEO of NRT, Ian Craig, who was then running NRT, had asked the carnival management committee to give them permission to kill lions in Lewa, because the reason given was that the lions were killing too many young gravy zebra. And the rest of the committee were wringing their hands. These were KWS staff, and they did not know how to push back against this demand by someone who was a member of the board of the trustees. So I was tasked to write the letter, and obviously I wrote the letter refusing to do this and stating that we only have a problem with the lions if they're killing people's goats, sheep, or people or children. If a lion is killing gravy zebra, frankly, I don't care, because that's what the wild prey is, what carnivores are meant to eat. Those in ecology know of the Lotka-Volterra equation that states an indigenous wild predator cannot hunt its wild prey to extinction. There's an equation by which that can't happen. But anyway, away from that technical thing, so what's happening now? The mongrel conservancy community conservation structure is unraveling, it's decaying. So what they put in place, and they put it in place even in the northern Kenya rangelands, is carbon trading, a second way to annex land. And first, when carbon, those who have been familiar with the carbon trading, they know it started from carbon sequestration being a factor of forests. They realize that that limits them to Mount Kenya area. You can't take over that much of northern Kenya because there's not a lot of forest. There's forests in Karisia, Marsabit, a few places, the Matthews range, but you can't take over a lot of northern Kenya if you attach carbon trading to forests. So they changed it to a grasslands carbon project. Suddenly the carbon now was in grass. It's not in trees. And NRT, with their scientific staff, at some point even had people in northern Kenya cutting down acacia trees, which are essential to giraffes, camels, gerenuk, and other browser species, because this was to open up grasslands. They were actually actively damaging the environment in northern Kenya. And I know the ecologists who are on the staff. I won't mention their names because they'll blame me for spoiling their careers. But this then also had its limits, because there are certain areas in northern Kenya, those of you who know Isiolo County well, and some parts of Marsabit, where there's very little grass. So how can you take over areas where there's no grass? That's when the guy who designed this soil scientist um, from Syracuse University in the US, is called Mark Ritchie. He came up with a new idea. Let's do soil carbon. This is like the perfect solution because there's soil everywhere. So he started a soil carbon project, and after earning so much money as a consultant in northern Kenya, he now started this thing called Soils for the Future Africa, wanting to do soil carbon trading. And this is now he wanted to carve out his own carbon credits fiefdom in southern Kenya. Recently, this included Oldonyonyokie and other parts of Kajiado and Narok counties, and the pushback has started. That has started unraveling. So we don't know. I don't know. The carbon credit one obviously is not going to last very long, because carbon credits is money laundering. I've said so several times, and it's just a matter of time before that one unravels. It won't last even as long as the conservancy model. So what is it that where does that leave us as Kenyans, the natives, the resources stewards, the practitioners, etc.? We have to get our house in order. KWS must now wake up and retake the territory it had ceded to NGOs and their corporate masters. KWS must wake up its Isiolo office. That few people even know where it's hidden, somewhere in a place called Kwamungania, near Isiolo. They must take up their mandate to hold wildlife in trust for us as the Kenyan people, and justify why we are spending our taxpayer money on them. And this involves reworking their strategy. Their strategy so far has been to beg. KWS is a beggar organization. They're constantly receiving donations of this, that, the other from people who have their own interests. We cannot have that. Not in a strategic state organization that is also one of the listed security organizations in this country. Kenya Police cannot be a beggar organization. Kenya Prisons cannot be a beggar organization. Administrative Police cannot be beggars. KDF cannot be beggars. So KWS cannot be beggars as well. Change the strategy and raise your own resources from your infrastructure and what we can get from the exchequer. And that requires strategic planning and proper reorganization. I think we should be completely restructuring the organization. We cannot cede power over something as important as our national heritage to foreign interests. The corporations running northern Kenya through their proxy, the Nature Conservancy, became so powerful that people appointed to the Ministry of Wildlife, before even visiting the parks, the first place they would do is they would go to on an official trip to Lewa to go and pay homage to NRT. The current permanent secretary and the former cabinet secretary did exactly that. All the entire ministry, top ministry staff, including KWS management, went to pay homage at Lewa immediately after they took over those offices. We cannot have this. You work for us, the citizens of this country. You don't work for those. You don't work for Lewa. You don't work for the corporate interests that support those things. So it's a complete change of strategy. And for the citizens, we must now become aggressive in stating our ownership of our resources, and not aggressive physically, but proactive. You must understand there's one absolute. There is no single person who has ever come from Europe or America to come and do some conservation or whatever in your place because they love you. No, not one. They have their interests. Then their interests, those are big interests. For someone to fly 10,000 miles across the world to come and do something, he has a very strong interest, or she has a very strong interest. And we must wake up to that. We must ask straight questions. I'm not saying necessarily reject them or chase them away. You must ask them, why have you come? Tell us why you have come. Because even now, as these methods are unraveling, I can tell you they don't sleep. Corporate world does not sleep, because the holy grail in the corporate world now is how much of African resources in terms of land, forests, water, minerals can you control, and forests as well. I think I mentioned that. Those are the holy grails, and that is what conservation organizations and NGOs are prostituting around in order to get resources for their operations. That it's as simple as that. So if you live near a forest, if you live in an area with wildlife, you live near fresh water, you just look around and see. You'll suddenly see someone coming. He's come from Europe. He's come to tell you how to take care of your forest, take care of your water, take care of the elephants that hang around your place. This is what we must wake up and realize. Our county governments are the next ones. Natural resources, by definition, are not movable. If there's a forest in Kakamega, for example, it is a huge sign of indolence for the Kakamega County government not to be concerned with what's happening in the management of that forest. You've never seen look at Busia, Kisumu, Homa Bay, and Migori counties. I've never seen any sort of caucus amongst those counties on management of Lake Victoria, the part that is in Kenya, or the environment. It's huge indolence. It's unbelievable indolence. And you can talk about look at the counties around Mount Kenya: Nyeri, Kirinyaga, Meru, Tharaka, Tharaka and Laikipia counties. You don't hear them talk about management of Mount Kenya. What are they thinking? Meanwhile, the fence around the Mount Kenya forest is being fenced by an NGO called Rhino Arc. This is the gap we have to fill as these models collapse, and they are collapsing. They're collapsing. Their collapse is inevitable because they are not collapsing because someone's fighting them, although many of us do oppose them. They are collapsing under the weight of their own bullshit, the weight of their own contradictions, their own dishonesty. So their collapse is inevitable, not a matter of if but it's a matter of when. We have to have our own ideas in place of how we are going to step into that gap they leave, because nature abhors a vacuum. Some of these areas where conservation had been taken over by NGOs, once the NGO collapses, what remains is some sort of chaos, insecurity, etc. Because our state authority had actually abdicated the work to those NGOs. So we need to wake up. We are at a crucial time, a risky time, but let's not look at it as a risk. Let's look at it as opportunity. And in the meantime, those of you who are anywhere up country, please find a good indigenous tree seedling and plant it to commemorate the collapse of this nonsense that has burdened us for the last 20 years.